Well, hey, everybody, welcome to a brand new podcast theme and focus for us at True Hope Church. We're calling it Stories of Hope. And I'm Ryan, the pastor of True Hope Church in Spokane, Washington. And I have the privilege of being here with two incredible guests today, some new friends, Anna and Trent Shadburn. Thanks so much for being on here. And we're going to explore a story of history, a story of friendship, a story of identity, a story of struggle, a story of repentance, and ultimately a beautiful redemption in Jesus Christ. And so I'm excited to explore that together. Thanks again for being here. Before we jump in, let's just have everybody get to know you guys. So Anna, we'll start with you. Just introduce yourself and maybe something unique about you and what you love to do for fun.
All right. Well, I'm Anna. Married to Trent.
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of weird hobbies. I like collecting signed books by astronauts. I brew kombucha. I have a few odd creative hobbies as well, but yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, Trent, how about you?
Same here, except a different time period. I'm a medieval reenactor, and I make as much of the stuff by hand as possible, whether it's blacksmithing or working with metal or copious amounts of sewing buttonholes by hand and all those laborious tasks that I, for some reason, find enjoyable.
You're also a great artist.
Oh.
Is that a hobby for you or just work? Or both?
Well, it was becoming too much work, so I got a different job instead of artwork so that I can do it for fun instead.
Right on. Okay, so tell us, how long have you guys been married?
We've been married for almost 5 years now. It'll be 5 years in October. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Congrats. That's a beautiful thing. So then tell us as well, Trent, how long have you been at True Hope Church? Kind of what's been the journey connecting to True Hope? And then just what are some components of being a part of True Hope Church that have meant a lot to you so far?
Yeah, so I've been going on and off for, ever since my parents moved here. How long ago was that? Like 2 years ago?
3 years ago, maybe?
3 years ago, yeah. It was about three, because it was Genesis. I remember
Okay.
going through Genesis, and whenever we'd visit, go to True Hope Church, and I knew I'd get some scripture served up straight, a la carte, just by itself, and I loved it. That was the thing that really brought me to just fall in love with the community at True Hope. Is just like, we're here to be transformed by the word, not to transform the word into what we want, but to come as we are and leave changed.
Yeah, that's good.
That's what I love about it.
Love it.
And now we've lived here for about 6.5 months, and we've been going pretty steadily.
Yeah. So you guys moved over in part because of some family stuff, the health of your dad, and so moved over here. What, 6 or 7 months ago?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, maybe just share a little bit about that and how it's been transitioning to Spokane and church.
Well, if I were to use one word to describe the whole last 6-7 months, it would be Providence. It just happens to be the name of the street that my parents live on, Providence Avenue.
Oh, wow.
Because the day after we moved over here, my father had a stroke and was paralyzed and pretty much debilitated, couldn't speak and stuff like that, and my mom's just in a wheelchair, so the Lord just seemed like he sent us over here.
Yeah, you came at the perfect time.
And it was just like, even though it wasn't the nicest of circumstances, it's like that God is in it because he's ordering our steps and you can just see it. Yeah. It's like, oh, this is not in my control, but I've got something to do. And that's kind of how moving over here has felt. It's like it's been one of those, what I would call a character building moment. Maybe not fun, but definitely it's been good. So it's I feel like things are just starting to kind of relax a little bit.
Yeah, and I feel like, we haven't had a very long time here, but already we've had people who've come alongside us and really supported us, and through the passing of his dad and everything, I feel like it's been really, really, even though it's been hard, it's been really good at the same time.
I'm so grateful for that. Grateful for you guys. I know your dad's passing was not easy, but we're also celebrating that he's free of pain and he's in the Lord's presence. And those are cherished promises that will await us all as well, unless Christ returns first. And so, thanks for sharing that. So, Anna, for you, just maybe being at True Hope Church, new group of people, new place. How's that been?
It's been, it's been an interesting experience. It's been kind of a humbling experience because I feel like through walking through this season, God's been working on me and kind of refining my priorities. And, I'm really excited to get involved in the community here because, so far it's been really good, getting to know, the few people we have. And already I feel connected, feel close to people here.
Well, I hope this helps. I hope part of what I envision Stories of Hope doing is also helping people meet people in our church. And, however many people engage with this podcast that are part of our church family, and maybe it's hundreds, maybe it's even over 1,000 people, like they're going to hear your guys' story. And your story is unique, and your story is powerful, and it's beautiful. And I hope that also helps to do that. It helps connect people to each other, and of course to the story God's writing with all of our lives. So let's dive into it. So this podcast, as I said, is about hope. And your guys' story is a story that's marked by genuine hope. It's also a story marked by deep transformation. And of course, we'll get into like your guys' friendship and your eventual marriage, but we have to start way earlier than that. We need to go all the way back into earlier season of life here. I know it's deeply personal, and I just first want to say thank you to both you, and particularly you, Anna, for being willing to be courageous and share your story. And I just appreciate it. I appreciate your honesty. We had a chance to obviously meet before this and go to dinner and kind of practice and work on this story we're going to share. But thank you. Honestly, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. It's a blessing to so many people. It's a blessing to me as a pastor. It's a blessing to our church family, and I think God's going to use it in powerful ways. So thank you guys. Appreciate you being here.
Glad to be here.
All right, Anna, so I'm going to start with you. Here's kind of the place we're going to begin. I want you to share, if you're willing to, and what you are, because you're here, just what was happening in your heart, in your mind, in your story during your teenage years, and what you were searching for in that season, and all that was going on and how that played out for you.
Well, when I was young, at a young age, I came to faith in God, and I saw God as my priority at the time. But unfortunately, in my teen years, there were some very difficult things going on. I witnessed a lot of just disturbing things in my own life, in the lives of those around me, and it brought up just a lot of confusion. I had a lot of pain I was going through without really guidance on how to deal with that. And all the while, from a very young age, I felt a very strong resistance to being a girl. I would have rather have been a boy. That's kind of the way I saw it. Obviously, back then, I wasn't really aware of gender identity, so I just thought, oh, I'd rather be a boy. I hate being a girl, but that's it.
Was this like stuff you couldn't articulate? It was like just deep in your thoughts, or was this conversations you'd have with friends or with your parents or anything like that? Like, were you talking that out at all, or was it just inside?
I'd kind of joke about it when I was young, like a little kid, but it almost felt like something I shouldn't talk about. And so when I got to high school, I was really struggling with a lot of things, beyond just gender identity, but I discovered that the existence of transgender people and the journey they would go on through transitioning, and I really resonated with those stories I read, and it felt like, oh, there's other people like me. I thought I was weird, or I thought I was alone with this. So I began to really research the different ways people would, the paths people would go down. And for me, at the time, I didn't want to grow up to be a woman because I couldn't see a future for myself as a woman. The only way I could see a future for myself is as a man, and I wanted the normal life, just very, I wasn't out to make a statement. I was just like, okay, if I can just find a normal life as a man, I think I'll be happy that way. And so,
were there attractions that came along with this season, or no? Was it more you looking at yourself, just going, I feel like I am not who I want to be, or if I was different, if I was a man, I would be like, does that make sense? Was that at all outward oriented, like attraction to others in romantically or sexually, or was it more, I just feel misplaced? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think I was also dealing with same-sex attraction as well, but I'd say, back then it was a lot easier to just be a lesbian. So that would have been the normal route. So I really...
But it was compounded. So you weren't just a girl who's attracted to girls. You're a girl who maybe feels attracted to girls, but also maybe deeper feel like I don't know if being a girl is the most comfortable place to be.
Yeah, it was, gosh, I was just so depressed. I felt like people around me didn't know the real me, like they couldn't see me for who I actually was. And, it was very difficult for me to try to navigate, because at the same time, it's like, I heard that Christians had a problem with LGBT stuff. I didn't really understand it. I didn't really have anyone who explained that to me. It was just kind of nebulous. Like,
and
okay.
You were confessing Christian at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're like, I was raised Christian, and so you were not, like, I don't know, do these things connect?
Yeah, I was very confused. But it's like, I tried finding God's will, and, not knowing where to go, I went back to those stories of people that I read about. And I looked at them. It's like, here's someone, with a wife, a job, a house, whatever, looks very normal, that, and they seem to be happy. Yeah. They're saying, this is how I found a way to be content, with the way I am. And so looking at that gave me hope. But there was still that nagging question, like, is this really right? And so I came out in high school, and I began presenting outwardly as male. I took the name Keith, and, overall, I had a good experience with that. It's like, before I was dealing with all these kind of psychiatric kind of problems, I dealing with psychogenic seizures that they said were due to stress, and, missing a lot of school, getting sick all the time. And as soon as I came out as Keith, it's like, it all went away. It seemed to be great for me. Everyone around me said, you look so happy. I had friends. Like, all of us, I went from being very isolated to being, having all these friends around me who I felt like really knew me. And, having this... making that identity outward to me gave me that confidence that I wanted, and so everything looked great for a little while. And then I'd say some very difficult things happened in my life. I had this, I always had this feeling of wanting to protect people, but feeling that I couldn't. And that got stronger and stronger. And, not see, I didn't see justice, I didn't see things working in the world around me. I didn't see people acting in a good and godly way. And it it was just, I was asking so many questions, and I got to the point where I kind of opened my mind and, why do I believe the things I believe? Why do I believe the things I believe about God, about the world around me? And so at the time, I began to follow a more universalist path. Many roads lead to God, and I began studying these other religions, these other faiths, and adopting different practices. And
This was in high school?
yeah, this was towards the very end of high school.
Okay.
And to me, it felt like this is great. I'm getting so enlightened. I'm moving on with my transition. After high school, after graduating, I began my physical transition.
So the first step was just hormonal
Yeah,
treatment?
yeah,
Okay.
just taking testosterone, and then later down the road, I had a double mastectomy, and so and it was such an odd time in my life because at the time, it's like every step of the road, whether it was going by a new name, having people affirm me, having starting testosterone, all that, it's like it felt like a release.
Right.
It felt like this kind of high, like I'm finally becoming myself. Here
Right.
I am.
Right.
And I found a great deal of satisfaction in that. But at the same time, deep down, it felt like there was something very wrong. I was very upset with the things I had witnessed around me, the things in just going on that it was a difficult time.
Yeah.
It was a difficult time to kind of reckon with. And even though I was turning to sort of open-mindedness spiritually, the transition, doing great in school, all those things seemed so great. At the same time, there was a lot of turmoil.
Interior, some fissures and
Yeah.
cracks were showing up.
Yeah.
Okay, so to summarize this, so like if I was to summarize, just for you grew up kind of always feeling like something was a little bit off. There's a desire to be a boy, not a girl. Some same-sex attraction elements develop, a component of like, man, I think I'd be better off if I could be a man. You hear about trans stories, opportunities. You do have as the background of your kind of your story and your foundations, general Christian faith, and you're kind of like trying to synthesize those two things. You pursue the gender transition and come out as Keith. And then to try to synthesize your faith, you essentially turn to kind of a more universalist, progressive, everything leads to the same place, we're all good. And now you're graduating high school and going to go to college. But internally you're saying, then no one would have known, but you're kind of saying some things were off inside.
Yeah.
So whereas to enter, so you go to college, and I think this is where you two meet, correct?
Yeah.
Yep. So let's talk about that. So you go to school, and how long into school was it that you two met?
Oh, first day.
First day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had a lot of the same classes.
It was even at the orientation.
Yeah.
Before it even started.
Okay. So Trent, let's jump to you. So at this point, you meet this new guy that you think's a guy.
Yeah.
Named Keith.
Oh, I know this is a guy.
Yeah, you know this is a guy. You meet Keith, and tell me about that. Like, tell me when you first met Anna, who was Keith, presenting as Keith, what drew you into friendship with her? Like, what was the thing that helped you connect, and what helped your relationship grow in that season?
Yeah, so when I met Anna, who was going by Keith at the moment, I was pretty naive to a lot of the transgender, what was going on in the U.S. or the world at that moment with all that. So that wasn't even on my radar.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, I also tend to be pretty trusting right off the bat, especially back then, because I was a lot younger. And I was just like, oh, yeah, Keith. Keith is who he says he is. And
Yeah.
that's what it was in my mind. It was settled. And I just thought that you were a pretty cool person. I thought you were funny. You were different. You seemed unique. You weren't there to beat up on anyone or be rude or anything. You just wanted to enjoy being around others and you had a lot of quirky hobbies like myself. And at the time, we had pretty similar looking afro type hair. And we there was a point in our life when we didn't actually know each other where we looked very similar, which is pretty funny. But yeah, I just thought you were cool and funny, and I really loved your artwork because it didn't seem like cookie cutter type stuff. It was just like this person just is super unique. So, yeah.
And so how long you guys struck up a friendship, you built a friendship. I mean, let me go back to you. So this is now in college, and this is probably, from what I've learned from you, this is where the story kind of starts to take some of its turn. So maybe fill us in on that, Anna. Help us with the turning point in college, correct? Mm-hmm. Where Jesus breaks through the confusion and kind of is lovingly reorienting your identity. Talk us through this, because this is the heartbeat of really your encounter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a couple years into college, I felt like everything was going so well in my life on the outside. I felt like I had a plan for my life. My transition was going well. Everyone recognized me as a man at that point, and, I was working hard. I had, again, a lot of friends in school, and it was, it seemed like everything was looking up. But at the same time, I had this deep turmoil still that hadn't ever fully went away. And I just, there was a point where God started asking me questions. They'd be questions I'd try to push away, like, oh, that's just my insecurity. I don't, I don't need that. But just through circumstances aligning the way they did, God would provoke more and more questions.
Can you remember any examples?
Yeah, well, I'd say the biggest question he would ask, it didn't start with my identity. It started with his identity. God would ask me who he was. And I was claiming like, oh, God's so infinite. We can't understand him. We each, we're each seeing a piece of God through a stained glass window, whatever.
Yeah.
It's
we all
like
have a piece of the
we all have a piece
in the dark room.
Yeah, exactly. That metaphor was very familiar to me.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, there's an elephant. So good.
That is, by the way, I'm trying to remember where I heard this from. I'm sure you've heard it because you're nailing the point. Mm-hmm. The argument of if everyone's in a dark room with their hand on a different part of an animal, and one guy says, I feel a tusk, and one guy says, I feel what is that thing? The trunk. The trunk. Yeah. And another one's, I feel tail, I feel a leg, I feel something leathery over here. And everyone's like, this must be an elephant. The fallacy of that argument is it presupposes someone's outside the room and has a definitive statement of what an elephant is. Mm-hmm. Like, isn't that kind of
they are feeling the elephant, which has a defined shape.
That's correct.
A definition of what it is.
So it's exactly. So the point again is objective truth has to be first anchored outside of the individual experience, or it has no bearing.
Yeah. Because the tail is not a rope. The leg is not a tree. Correct. It's like,
But you were running with, because that's such a, and I love this. That's such a popular philosophical framework that people say. It's multi-perspectivalism. It's this a multi-relativism approach. Your truth is your truth, and you do you, and it's like that's your angle. That's cool, man. You can do the Christian thing, and you can do the Buddhist thing, and you can do this thing, and you can do the trans thing, and
it comes across nice.
It seems very loving.
Everyone is right, but at the end of the day, it is also a truth claim that says everyone else is actually wrong.
Correct.
Because everyone else is having a definite truth claim, and you're saying, no, actually, you're wrong. I'm right. But my idea envelops all of yours.
Yes.
So at the end of the day, it still is an exclusive truth claim.
Because at the end of the day, it turns out we can't get away from exclusive truth claims. So, okay, back to you. So this is kind of, thank you for sharing that. That's like one of the things you feel God's breaking down, the questions he's asking about him.
Yeah.
So continue.
So, I was pondering these questions, and, I went from being drawn to very free-flowing, almost new age kind of religious expressions to very concrete ones, very traditional. And in these very traditional expressions, whether it's traditional Christianity, Islam, Judaism, everything, anything that's really rooted and exclusive, you kind of have to make sense of those. Like, I remember just coming to the point where I was wondering, like, okay, I love Jesus. I still love Jesus. I still read the words of Jesus, but I have to believe that I believed he historically existed. And if he did, he either died and never rose, as a lot of people claim. He either rose and never died, as a lot of other people claim, or he died and rose from the dead.
Yeah.
And that's what I had originally hinged my faith on. Yep. Which of those three options was reality? Had I gone so far from the basis of who I had known God to be that I was questioning that fact. And so, with that came questions about my life. I realized I was living very self-centered, a very self-centered lifestyle. I wasn't really helping anyone. I was just working on my own future. I was supporting myself and no one else, and that bothered me, and it began to bother me that all these religious expressions I was looking at, none of them historically supported the gender identity issue. If you're born a man, you're a man. If you're born a woman, you're a woman. There might be some exceptions here and there.
So Christianity, Islam, Judaism, which are the three dominant monotheistic religions, none of them.
Yeah, as well as traditional Buddhist culture, all these traditional cultures, which I had been saying, were compatible in this big whole, holistically, they were not accepting of that pathway. And if they did, it was usually just a modern phenomenon, with the exception of a few cases, obviously. Yeah. But it's so... Looking at that and realizing, 100 years ago, you don't really see this phenomenon. I saw it as a medical issue personally. I saw that, in fetal development, parts of the brain develop with different hormones. I believe that theory. And once I started looking into it, I saw that, there wasn't much to it. There was research done, but it was very preliminary, not enough to draw strong conclusions off of. And I'd been going forward with this confidence that that was concrete truth.
So to clarify that for everybody, that's essentially the idea that I am female anatomically, but I have a male brain.
Yeah. Long story short,
that theory.
That theory. So that's what I believed, and that's why the way I was moving forward, and so I was forced to kind of face, like, would I do this if I didn't believe it was a necessity, a medical necessity? And, when I really looked at it, the answer was no. This was a very destructive thing, just physically, for the sake of relationships. It was all for myself. It was to make me comfortable. It was to make me happy. It wasn't for the sake of my family. It wasn't for the sake of the world around me, unless the goal was keeping me here, which obviously if I'm a person of faith, I believe God can do that. Yeah. I was saying that, I would say in my mind, all I need all I need is God. I'm such a spiritual person. I'd give up anything. I'd give up all the stuff I have. I'd move to the other side of the world if God asked me to, but I wouldn't give up this transition because I said, oh, it's medically necessary. And it's like, okay, well, if it isn't, what am I doing?
Right.
And so I was so attached to it, though.
Yeah.
It felt like it was such a good thing in my life. And, I started praying, over everything. Like, I don't know what's true at all. I don't know what happened. I'm questioning the fabric of reality itself, is material reality a projection of the subconscious mind, all this bizarre philosophy. And at the end of the day, I knew truth had to be concrete. It had to be stable, and there had to be answers out there. So I prayed to God, just, I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't know what's wrong with what I believe, but I know there's something very wrong. I know I need to change. I used to, back then, I would go to a different church every week, and, it got to the point where, people would be so welcoming, and, I felt like God was there, and I'd be getting things from the sermons, and it'd be great. And I'd come away feeling like I didn't belong in there. And it wasn't their fault for not welcoming me. It was me, So I prayed, God, whatever it is, please heal me, change me, and whatever I need, just please give me direction. And so, in the coming weeks, I began to get a little bit of clarity here and there. I got to the point where, I began to question God's existence. Like, am I just holding on to this because it's an idea I was raised with? And God put so many things in my life that could not be coincidences. He showed himself in my life in a powerful way. And he began to make it clear where he drew the lines. And, I'd pray about direction. And, I felt like I need to give up the selfish things. I need to, whatever the answers are, I need to die to myself, essentially. And, all this stuff I'm holding on to, I need to give it up. And so I was led to privately detransition. I quit testosterone cold turkey, which I wasn't supposed to do, but I spiritually, it felt like the right thing to do.
Isn't there a part of your story where you were washing dishes though? Tell me about that part.
Yeah.
So kind of that's like the zooming in on the moment. So yeah, share with that.
Yeah. So yeah, I had a dishwashing job. And that's really where God would meet me, because it was the only time I couldn't tune him out. I would just be working 6 or 8 hour shift, no music, no talking, no nothing. And
you were alone with your thoughts.
Yeah, I was alone with my thoughts, and I hated it, because I didn't want to think about all this stuff, and after enough of that and realizing how weak my own explanations were, my own beliefs were, and how contradictory the things I believed were. That drew me to that place. Yeah.
So this happened. So the dishes, that's kind of the place God began to peel back the layers. Yeah. How long was this journey from like? I know it goes all the way back to high school, where even when you start to present as Keith, there's this nagging thing deep down inside. But it seems like over some years, that gets the fissures get larger and larger and larger, and you start questioning the very fabric of reality itself, which is interesting because transitioning is in a sense rejecting some level of providential reality.
Yeah.
So how long? Like how long is the wrestling?
Well,
here?
I'd say I had probably a year of contentment with my transition where, it felt really established. And I had, after that, maybe it was pretty, looking back, it felt really long, but looking back, it wasn't long at all. You know,
Okay.
maybe a 6-month journey in there
Yeah,
where
yeah,
I
yeah.
was figuring out the basics,
Okay.
you know,
Okay.
tearing it down and building it back up.
Yep.
And so I, so yeah, it was after I had already reached a point of stability with my transition where, you know, everything seemed great. You know, I was nearing the end of my school program, which was great. I was going to be, you know, living the rest of my life. And it's like, you know, God just interrupted me,
Yeah,
you know, and
yeah.
it, you know, in that process, once I got to the point where I was fully surrendered, there were a lot of things I needed to change. You know, I needed to learn how to forgive, you know, actually forgive and not just excuse people's actions. You know, I needed to just trust God when it came to his will and his justice, you know, and I also needed to learn the true weight of my sin. You know, I remember reading through Leviticus and realizing like all the ways, all the things I'd done that had earned me the death penalty under the law. And it was incredible, you know, just recognizing the fullness of God's grace.
Yeah.
You know, how much he's willing to save us from, save me from. And so, you know, when I was first putting the pieces together, to backtrack a little bit, I came to this point where I was surrendered and I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what I was supposed to be. I just knew that God is going to, you know, if God's out there, he's going to make me a new person. And so I began to read scripture cover to cover, just like from scratch. Like, okay, I'm going to put away all my preconceived notions. The only thing I'm going to remember is the English language, and I'm going to like try to see what this actually means, and you know what it's meant to be, not just all these ideas I put onto it. And so it was really an incredible process because I had, again, no idea what I was doing, no idea who I should be, and so I lost myself, but I gained peace. Because before, truth was always moving, you know.
Yeah.
And it, you know, whether it was the philosophies I followed or, you know, being deceived by people, you know, it was very hard for me to figure out what was ever true. And so for once I had this anchor that would not move and I could base my life off.
Yeah.
And I knew if, you know, God was there and, you know, he was true in the person of Jesus, you know, that he would guide me through this and that he would guide me through his word. And so I began to put the pieces back together. And so, yeah, I began to privately detransition. Then I thought, okay, now I'm a butch lesbian. You know, it took me a while to then put the next piece together. Like, wait a second, the marriage thing is, you know, that's another issue. And so I began to kind of work through it step by step. Like, who am I supposed to be? Where am I supposed to go? What's my place?
Yeah.
And you know, it was kind of scary and it was kind of humiliating, but at the same point, it's like I knew God would provide for me.
I love that statement. I lost myself.
Yeah.
But I found peace.
Yeah.
Because again, the cultural narrative is find yourself.
Yeah.
And you'll find nirvana.
Yeah.
And your testimony is, no, I had to lose myself to find peace, genuine, stable peace. That's very Jesus language.
He who would lose his life
Yeah.
find it.
Okay,
Yeah.
so let's get you back in here, Trent. So this is amazing. This is awesome. The long journey, God's powerfully at work in Anna's life. So she's starting to put the pieces back together. Jesus is the bedrock of this. She's learning his values, his ways as she's reading the scriptures. And you're privately detransitioning, correct? But that doesn't stay private for very long.
Yeah.
But at some point, you come and talk to him because you guys were friends. So maybe Trent, talk to me about this. Tell me how did it happen where Keith, air quotes, tells you, "I'm not Keith."
Well, it's funny. I have to kind of back up a little bit.
Okay, yeah, go for it.
Because, there were a lot of breadcrumbs, and I was leaving the breadcrumbs to the squirrels. I was not picking them up.
Yeah.
I was just like, that's funny. There was a lot of things where it's like, I remember one time, my mother was driving both of us and taking you back home, and she just looked in the rearview mirror, and then after we dropped you off, she was just like, that's a woman, right? Look at those eyes. That's a woman. And I was like, no, that's just my buddy Keith. He's just young.
Moms know.
They know. Thank you, Mom.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of little things.
But you're just like, you don't want to assume, and you're just kind of going to keep going.
Like, hey, I trust people, and you are who you say you are. But then it was like, I had the whole the cork board with all the little pins and the red lines and everything, and I was fitting everything together.
Yeah.
Like right as soon as you said, by the way, my name is Anna.
No, I didn't even tell you my name.
You didn't tell me your
No,
name?
you told me my name.
I told you?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. She shared that at dinner, remember?
Oh, that's right.
Because you saw it somewhere.
Yeah, I think early on I was like, Annalise Lyon. That's interesting. I wonder why his name was changed. That's weird. Huh. But I just I don't know if I was purposely laying on inches of skull to make it so it didn't enter in, but it was just and then I said, did I say is your name Annalise?
Yeah.
I don't even remember that.
Because I told you, I figured you'd be the safest person to
because you guys were close. You guys were close friends.
And you knew
is he
that
the first one you
came out to again?
The second time?
Yeah, because it's I knew he was always very open about his faith, and I knew he was a very conservative, biblical kind of Christian. I figured, out of all the people I know, he's probably the safe person to talk to. So I think you were the first person inside my family that I told.
And I just remember being ecstatic, and I immediately kind of went down my list of family members, just saying, "Hey, remember Keith? You were right, Mom." Hey, call up my sister. Hey, you were right too. I can't believe it.
Right.
I feel like such a numbskull.
But this is not where your guys' romance begins, because at this point you're dating another girl, right? You're in a relationship. Yeah. So Keith becomes,
and we're just buddies.
Yeah,
we go way back.
Buddy Keith becomes Anna, but you're like, wow. I mean, that's awesome. I'm glad you're now living in the truth, not living your truth. You're living the truth. Awesome. That resonates. But you're not romantically attracted to her. You are in a dating relationship. And so let's go here. So, okay, you're walking in your Christian faith. You've been through this journey of transformation and clarity, and you guys are friends. When is the moment where each of you respectively start to realize we're not just buddies? I kind of have feelings for this person.
Yeah. So I think, that conversation was the first, truly close conversation we had. And, he was very excited about my faith journey and, sharing that. And, but a few months later, there was a time where we were meeting together after he had gone through some difficult things. And I remember, we're sitting down talking, and he was telling me about how God got him through about a lot of stuff. And, I remember he just had, tears in his eyes, just the joy of how God had helped him. And, I felt in that moment this strange, almost like God telling me, you're going to marry him. And I thought, oh, no, because I I had always really respected him. I hadn't had those feelings before, but all of a sudden I felt just this, this feeling that I did want to marry him. And, it was exciting. And at the same time, nothing I had wanted before was right for me. So I thought, no, this is just,
Yeah,
it was just feelings.
Suspicious of your desires.
Yeah. This is just feelings. I don't want to mess things up, So I kept that to myself.
Was that one of the earliest or first recollections of being attracted to a man?
Yeah.
Okay, wow. Because you said to me privately or before this that like when you felt like you really settled who Jesus was and that he is the ultimate truth, and it's not relative, you were content to just have gender dysphoria be maybe a part of your reality, that you would live in a posture of repentance, but that the things in your body, your desires, you may live with that dissonance and accept that as a cross to carry. Is that correct?
Yeah, I had assumed that I would feel really deep gender dysphoria the rest of my life, like I had, in my teen years, and even a little bit before. I had this very deep depression over who I was, this self-hatred, and I assumed that just wouldn't go away, and within weeks or months it was that was gone. God healed that. And it's the same thing with same-sex attraction. It's like I assumed I'd have that the rest of my life, and it over time it became just less of an issue for me as I just focused on God and cut out a lot of media, and it's like, okay, I'm just gonna focus. I'm gonna, just be single, and if I'm single the rest of my life, that's great. I'm with God, and I submitted that to God, that God would provide me family somehow. And so, when this came up, I was like, oh, this is new.
Okay, so how long? So you started having you had an impression, like you felt. You looking at it now, you obviously can say, but you're like, I think this was the Lord. Like I'm attracted to this guy, and I'm gonna marry this guy. So how long until where are you at in this? When you kind of start to kind of go, oh, I think I might have feelings for her.
Well, it was over a cup of a bacon latte.
Was it really?
It was actually.
Okay.
Which I think you invented, but
it's another one of my weird hobbies is inventing weird food.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And awesome. I am happy to be someone which that hobby can be lavished on. This was the first time, and so I didn't know that Anna had feelings for me. I had just pretty much been like, oh, Anna's like one of those like super Christians now, and she just like God is her person. She doesn't need a human counterpart.
Yeah.
God. She's just like, oh, I'm married to Jesus. Kind of.
Yeah.
In my brain's like,
yeah.
Like I'm not gonna mess what she's got going.
Yeah.
Because at this point, I also am out of a relationship, so I'm single, and I'm just like, hey, you know what? I'm kind of like it's just me and God right now.
Sure.
I don't need anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And I got invited to a 4th of July party where I heard there was going to be bacon lattes, and there were, and I was just like, really like this person, because over the last few weeks, I guess it didn't start with the bacon lattes, but that's where it was resolved. That's where it crystallized. But like over the last few weeks before that, like I even remember the shirt you were wearing. We were just having like these conversations about God, not about you, not about me, no ego. It was just how good God is, his redemptive power, and how amazing he is. Mm-hmm. It was pretty much like, it was like we were worshiping God just through our conversation. Yeah. It was like we were writing worship songs while talking, pretty much. That's the way I'd put it. And like I just was like, man, this is awesome. I've never felt so spiritually close to someone before, and just bonding. Like we already were friends, like fast friends, but now we were just talking about God, and I just felt such a joy in those conversations. And I was talking to my mom, and it's just like, I think I like Anna. And she's like, good. I was hoping you guys would like each other. Now I just need to pray that she likes you too, which little did I know.
She did.
Yeah. It's like,
Okay.
thanks, Mom.
Yeah.
And so now I'm just kind of like, well, I like this person. I don't know if she likes me. I'm just going to be a good friend.
Mm-hmm.
Lord, it's in your hands.
Yeah.
What will happen will happen. I'd be fine with being just friends.
Mm-hmm.
And we just had such a great time with our friends, drinking bacon lattes, firing off fireworks and stuff like that. And I just remember it was like, I didn't even consciously think about it, but we kind of slipped away and we're just...
everyone else left and we were
Was that what it
cleaning.
was?
Yeah, we were cleaning up
Okay.
and we just started talking and we ended up talking for hours.
And hours.
Just walking around outside, talking and I think that's...
Just sharing our stories pretty much.
Yeah. And, that's when we mutually kind of realized that, we both had feelings for each other. And, we got together a couple days from then. And that's when I told him that, you're exactly the kind of person that I'd like to spend the rest of my life with. And I think he said the same thing.
I said ditto.
That's
I actually said the same
So
exact
how
thing,
long
but
from then till marriage? Do you remember?
The next day, no.
Well, he proposed to me a year after.
I promised my brother that I would date someone for at least a year
Okay.
before marrying them.
Okay.
It was a year to the day.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. And it was
Promise.
a year to the day.
Promise made, promise kept.
Yeah. Awesome.
And then
Keep
we got married 3 months after that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you remind us all again? You were married now for
over 4 years, almost 5 years.
Almost 5.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was October 3rd, 2020. Very small COVID wedding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the COVID, I can remember COVID. So let me ask you both this. So you've been married for almost 5 years. How have you both experienced God's faithfulness and His transforming grace in your marriage? And so obviously you have a unique story. And so how has that carried on and continues to carry into your story today in your marriage?
Yeah. Well, I think God has really used our marriage to grow us as people. I feel like we've both, in continuing to walk with God together, we've grown closer to each other, closer to God. We've also had a lot of time with just our church communities, discipling others, and I feel like there's a unique balance with our personalities and our stories, and obviously God knows what He's doing. So I feel like we've kind of it's been great. We've had God's brought us through a lot. Some seasons have been fun and some seasons have been really painful, but God's been really faithful through them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the fact that the foundation of our connectedness has always been God, and so we kind of just always wanted to make sure that I love my wife, but if I don't love God more and first and foremost, then I won't love you the way that I should.
Yeah.
And that was I could tell that was what it was with you. And so there's always been that, God first and then each other and then an outpouring of that. And I think a big aspect of our relationship and the fact that we both are, broken people made whole by God, that we want a foundation of our relationship was wanting to outpour towards others.
Yeah.
And
It's awesome.
just ever since I was a kid, I felt like God was telling me, you're going to do ministry, but it wasn't defined. So it's just like, okay, we'll do it. And, turns out it's just like, I think I actually heard in one of your podcasts where you were quoting St. Augustine, and it's just like, love God and do what you want. And that's been kind of like, love God first, and then do what you want. And then, like, the Lord is, like, with our story and stuff like that, just made us into people that want to pour into other people's lives.
Yeah, isn't that beautiful? The culture, our world's language is do what you want. When Augustine flips it on its head, if you'll love God and like really stop and marinate on that phrase, love God.
Yeah.
And that's what's so powerful about your story, Anna, is it started with God asking you questions about who you thought he was, not questions about who you thought you were.
Yeah.
Is who is God? Because to love God means we must love him on his terms. You can't love anyone on your own terms. You have to love them on their terms, because otherwise it's not love. It's self-serving. And I think that's so beautiful. So yeah, love God and do what you want. I think you guys' marriage and your story is beautiful. And I pray for God to continue to bless you and lead you and your story to bless many others. I want to kind of move us to like the heartbeat questions here, which, Anna, I'm going to start with you. What would you say to someone who's maybe listening to this, or maybe they're not listening to this, but we would hope they would, that feels stuck or striving in their identity struggle? I got the wrong brain, I got the wrong body. Or maybe like in our current culture right now, it's not, that's still somewhat discussed, but it's really moved on to almost like you craft you. So it's like there's 47 different gender expressions you could pick or move yourself towards. What would you say to someone who's feeling pulled towards that, feels stuck in that, or maybe there's just heaps of guilt and they just feel like they're too far gone. They've done things and there's no way of coming back. What would you say to them?
Yeah. Well, I'd say for people considering walking down that road, it's a long road, and it doesn't end. You're following a light at the end of the tunnel, and you never quite get there. Whenever you try to find satisfaction in yourself, in building up yourself, it doesn't satisfy. And, for people who are already down that road and they're having to contend with, boy, this feels like the right thing, but I don't know if it's the right thing. If you find yourself in that place, just look to God first. It's, whatever decisions you're making in life or whatever struggles you have across the board, look to God first. Earnestly look at Scripture. Earnestly pray, and make sure you search your heart that you're okay with any answer. And that's something I've had to continue to do. Even recently, I feel like God brought me through a season where I had to throw out some things I was holding on to. And, I feel like that's part of the Christian life. And so for anyone dealing with any struggle as a Christian, you have to make sure you're fully surrendered. That God is number one, priority, direction, and that you're genuinely seeking his word and his intention for your life. Because I know for me personally, when I was earnestly seeking, I began to see the brokenness in my own decisions and the brokenness in my path ahead, and how it was never going to end.
Yeah.
And so, there's just, I remember standing at the end of that road and thinking like, okay, I'm going to give this up, but now what? It felt like I had no idea what was going to happen. It felt like I was giving up myself, like the very being of who I was, and I was giving up everything, but there was a life on the other side of that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's good. Trent, what would you say? So, I mean, obviously you're a big part of this story, but you're also kind of like in this particular part, you're playing a unique, you're seeing it from a unique angle. So I know offline too, you just shared some things with me when we had met earlier, just about your own family and just your own experiences in life. And like, what would you say to people who are walking alongside people who either have this in their story or it's presently in their story? Again, whether that's on any facet of the LGBTQ conversation, like what would you say to a fellow Christian that, I mean, it's a parent with a kid, or it's a friend with a friend, or it's a brother to a brother, or a sister, sibling, or whatever. How would you speak to that?
Well, one of the first and foremost things I would say is don't assume that you know that person's story and that you know what that person's feeling, what they're going through. Don't assume. That's the first thing.
Yeah.
In a way, I was forced not to assume with Anna because I didn't know that Keith was Anna. And so I just came at it from a perspective of like any person.
Right.
Like, I'm just a Christian and I'm going to be a Christian around this person when I'm with this person. So that would be the first thing, is don't assume that I know what's going on in this person's head. Or, I listened to, a video once where I heard someone, and I bet that's exactly what you're going through. This is what you need. But first, come alongside them and just have a relationship with this person.
Yeah.
Give them a reason to listen to you. It's just like if I come up to someone randomly and start talking to them, they don't know me. Why should they even care what I think? Versus like if you're someone that this person knows they can trust, that they can have, prove yourself faithful to this person, and not just as a tactic, but just as trying to be the light of Christ in their life.
Yeah, that's good.
And so another thing is also asking questions, before giving answers and before assuming, just asking questions. Hey, I just noticed, this. So I just really am curious, what caused you to want to pursue this path? How does this make you feel? If they are pursuing a professing Christian, say like, hey, you're a Christian and, you're also doing this. I'm just curious.
Yeah.
What do you think about, like, how do you balance those two things?
Yeah.
And ask questions about things.
Yeah.
And the more you learn, pray, obviously. Like, first and foremost, it's God who's going to give us the answer.
Yeah.
No one's ever been argued into the kingdom of God. But at the end of the day, people need Jesus.
Yeah.
And, we can assume that what someone needs is to change their gender identity. When it's like, they might change their gender identity and then go to hell because they never knew Jesus.
Right.
Yeah. And so first
That's
and
good.
foremost, it's Jesus who's going to do the work.
Yeah.
But he might want you to be part of that.
Right.
And so be willing for the promptings of the Holy Spirit. I just got that one right now.
Yeah.
But be willing for the promptings of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, that's good.
To be the element of his change in that person's life. But also just be a Christian, be a good friend, and don't hide the fact that you are a Christian.
Right.
So that they know why you're different.
Does it change with someone who's not a professing Christian? So I love what you said. You said, don't assume.
Yeah.
Stay curious and practice it with question asking, like genuine question asking, not gotcha questions, but like you modeled it. Like, tell me what led you down this path? A great question.
Be curious.
Actually be curious. Don't fake curiosity.
And know that you don't know the answer.
That's good. And then the last one, like pray and yield yourself to the role the Spirit of God might have you play. Okay, especially when you're talking to a professing Christian because of the incongruence there with what we see biblically and theologically. What about our general posture to the world? And I want both of you just to speak to that. Like, what should the church's general posture be around the whole LGBTQ community?
Well, I think I'll quickly tie up my end and then I'll hand it off to you. But I think the first thing is to, him who is without sin, let him cast the first stone. How many of us, if we went up on stage during a given Sunday with Jesus and he put up on the, on the projector, the hidden incognito tabs of our mind. Like, how much of us would be like, oh shoot, I'm no one to.
Yeah.
I'm not righteous.
Yeah.
It is only the righteousness of Christ.
Yeah.
And so the first and foremost thing is to know that maybe the object of maybe the object of my disgust, this person who I find just like, I can't even look at this person because of what they're doing to themselves and to society. To say, the object of my scorn and even disgust is the object of God's grace. Because as it says, so were some of you.
Yeah, correct. It's good. What would you say?
Yeah, I'd say there needs to be a posture, like you said, of, we need to recognize our own faults and be very humble and honest about where we go wrong. But at the same time, we're going to hold on to what's right, and it's not my righteousness, it's God's righteousness,
Yep.
Pointing to God's word and, the lines that he draws for us, the boundaries that he gives us to flourish. I think it's important to walk in humility, grace, and truth, and, being willing to point that out. And, for me, I would walk into these churches and, as I was, and I got to hear the truth.
Yeah.
And it was a beautiful thing. And I think, we need to welcome people who are walking through these struggles, but also as we build relationships with them, there will come a time for asking questions and even, potentially confrontation.
Yeah.
Like I never had the privilege of experiencing that myself, but, I think having gone through what I have, I believe there is a time to sit down with someone and say, you're hurting yourself.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's that tension of grace and truth. And, it's like, and Jesus is the perfect embodiment of that. And we struggle, but he's still our example. And to just make sure we got to love, and we got to be curious, and we got to be humble, and we got to be genuine, but we also can't be ashamed of God's standards, God's lines, God's boundaries. Don't compromise. Yeah. Because it's like, there's a reason behind every rule of God. God is not an arbitrary, just, angry rule maker who just decides, I want to draw a line there for fun. Yeah. He's not that kind of father. He's not that kind of creator. He's created standards for our good. And it's just well said. And I just pray God continues to help all of us in the church navigate that, to not be ashamed of the truth, but then also not weaponize the truth in such a way that we're not genuinely caring about the objects of his grace.
Yeah.
And that there are people just like us, all of us, and we all have these sin patterns of idolatry and immorality in us. And God is reforming and healing all of us. So, and I want to wrap this up with you. This podcast is Stories of Hope. Will you just share with everybody why you have such hope in Jesus Christ?
Yeah. Well, a lot of times when people hear my story, they say, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry this happened. And a lot of times I see stories similar to mine that are presented with this kind of doom and gloom, like, look at this person who ruined their life, and I feel like that's kind of what's out there. But for me, it's like, my life isn't ruined. My God has been faithful.
Amen.
God has been good to me. God has given me peace and, such security in him that if I hadn't walked through this journey, like, obviously God's in control. he let me go down this road.
Yeah.
And if he hadn't, I don't know if I would be so secure in him, because I fell and he picked me up, and to me, that's worth a lot more
beautiful.
than a normal life. It's only skin deep, it's like God has been so good, and I'd much rather someone go through the road I did and find God at the end rather than live a conventional life and never find God,
Yes.
Yeah.
That's so good. That's so good. I remember when we were meeting earlier in the week, you said, and that really connected to me, that lots of people think I've ruined my life, but I'm not ruined. I'm redeemed.
Yeah.
And that's all of us.
Yeah.
And you're right. All of our stories are stories of hope, because it's like the terrain of our redemption is all unique. But the thing that's not unique is Jesus is the Redeemer, and we are all the ones who he's putting back together. And so the things that we go through and things that we experience are varied and unique and different. But you're right. So much as they serve to bring us to our knees and bring us to a place of genuine reception of Christ, that is the ultimate prize. Mm-hmm. That's so good. I just want to say it again before we wrap it up. I love what you said earlier about peace. I lost myself, but I found peace. Yeah. That statement gives me so much hope, because I think we could put so many different ideas in the container of what we think we're losing. When God calls us to something, what we think we're losing, when we try to find ourselves, build ourselves, make ourselves, save ourselves, fix ourselves, and actually the message of the gospel, the message of Jesus, which is a message of hope, rings out. Actually, be willing to lose yourself. Yeah. And if you do, you will actually find life. Yeah. You will find what you could never manufacture and what you could never build. I just want to say thank you to you for your honesty, for your courage. Trent, thank you for being a man of God. Thank you for living this story out, both of you. I'm so excited to just see how God continues to use your guys' story and continues to write a beautiful testimony through your marriage and your commitment to him. And I pray that God would just bless you richly. And I pray that this story would bless our church. So thank you both so much for being here on Stories of Hope.